Okay. February, yes, it is the time that is set aside for the United States as a whole to make sure that we are celebrating the accomplishments and the achievements of the African American people. However, for the African American people, Black history is every day, right? Or at least it should be. I was bombarded really with messages from teachers, from students who were putting up murals in their schools on, bulletin boards, or they would decorate their doors. And a lot of teachers decided this year they were going to honor Colin Kaepernick. And multiple teachers here in the state of Florida, other states as well, all below the Mason-Dixon line, um, they had the teachers remove the Colin Kaepernick mural. They said he was too controversial. They didn't want to alienate other students. They felt like he shouldn't be celebrated, and so all of the time and effort that the students and the teachers put, and I mean these were beautiful decorations. I mean whole doors had him kneeling and everything. And one video, the teacher was literally in tears as she was taking down that mural honoring Colin Kaepernick. And basically they threatened her, it's your job or you take it down. And my question is, why? What is it that he did that was so bad that it would make you threaten a teacher with firing her just to take down an image? We honor Muhammad Ali. He did the same thing, basically. We honor other controversial figures. I guarantee if a student walked in there with a Mein Kampf book, you wouldn't kick him out. Who knows what Mein Kampf is? You said Trump? Mein Kampf is the book that Adolf Hitler wrote. It's still one of the best-selling books in America. Although it is banned from certain school libraries, if you look up the most books sold, of course, the Bible is number one. And Mein Kampf is still in the top 10. This is a man who committed genocide. So my thing is, why? Why is it that Black people are so controversial? What is it that bothers people about us so much that they are just agitated by our presence? They want us around, but then they don't want us around all at the same time. What is it? It's fear. And not just fear, but fear of the fact that they see our greatness. So it's not just scared of your presence, it is intimidation. I wholeheartedly believe that. Because you only try to subjugate something that you're scared of. There you go. There you go. Think about it, right? This was always my thing. May I introduce you to the Kardashians? Oh, may I introduce you to the Kardashians? Right? You love everything about us, right? I was gonna wear a T-shirt that says "You love our culture, but you don't love us. You love our rhythm, but you don't want to take our blues." So I watched this stupid show. Actually, Paula got me into it because Paula had this amazing ability. For those of you who don't know who Paula is, it's Mother Foster's niece, is Pastor Carl's cousin. She was here from Jamaica a couple years ago, and she has this amazing ability to be able to sit in front of the TV and watch like all of these different shows back to back to back. So sometimes I would sit down there with her. She started watching this show called Sleepy Hollow. And the premise of that show is that I don't know if you guys know the legend of Sleepy Hollow with Ichabod Crane and all that stupidity, all that caucasity and stuff. But they turned it on his head. They put it with a twist. So Ichabod Crane is the white guy, and he happens to wake up 250 years later, after the Revolutionary War. He happens to wake up in 2014. I'm not even going to get into how that was possible, but here you have a man who helped found the country. He fought in the Revolutionary War. He was a friend of General Washington. He knew basically all the founding fathers, and he dies on the battlefield. But they kept him like almost frozen in time until 2014. He awakes, and he's supposed to fight evil so that the country can be saved and all that stupidness. But the thing that's interesting about this show is Ichabod wakes up, and he is a man from 1776, around there, 17th century. He wakes up in 2014, so he's seeing cars and cell phones and tap water and the shower, coffee machines, and he's like all confused. And the first person that he happens to encounter is a black woman, and he says to her, she introduced herself. My name is Lieutenant Abby Mills. And he goes, Lieutenant, oh, so you've been freed. And she's like, I'm sorry, what? He's like, you've been emancipated. She was like, yeah, it's been like that for quite some time now. They even let us wear pants now, too. But the show is interesting to me because I think, what if we could wake up Frederick Douglass? Your president tried to do that a couple years ago anyway. What if we could wake up Ida B. Wells, Martin Luther King? If we woke them up and just not even put them, brought them around town. No. Just sat them in front of a TV and let them watch CNN or MSNBC all day. What would they say about the state of America? What would they say about the state of Black America? Would they be happy with it? Would they be sad about it? Would they be angry about it? That's kind of my we wake up Ida B. Wells, who was the champion for really holding America accountable to the unjust lynchings of black men. She wrote in her paper fiercely, even though she was getting death threats and almost lynched herself. She wrote every single day about the atrocities of these black men and women being lynched. And so what if we woke her up and we sat her in front of the TV and said, well, they stopped lynching us, kinda, but now the police are shooting us just because. What if we woke up Frederick Douglass, who was a great orator and writer and champion of emancipation, and we said, well, we're free now, kinda. What if we woke up Martin Luther King and was like, oh, remember that dream you had? Schools are integrated, kinda. Kinda. How far have we really come? Yeah, even Rosa Parks died pretty much. She and after 2000, I think 2005 or 2006. So she got to see a lot, but you know, we can ride the bus now, but we still prefer to sit in the back. We willingly like to sit in the back. So appreciate your stance, but we like the back. Back is cool. That's what I've been thinking about the last couple of weeks. What would these pioneers say about the state of America, the state of Black America? So I gave this year a theme for a reason because I wanted to focus our attention on not just learning facts and statistics about, this person was the first Black person to do this and this person was the first Black person to do that. That's great. but that's also Googleable. And yes, I just made that up. It's copywritten, so I will sue if you try to use it. It is Googleable, right? These are information. Shoot, you can ask Siri. You can go home and ask Alexa, who was the first black person to go to the moon? Those things are easy to find. My thing is, and I'm whew, I'm allergic to ignorance as a whole, not just about Black history. That really grinds my gears, but I just don't like it when people willingly commit to being ignorant. I think that's the saddest thing in the world to me. And so I wanted to focus on a theme that would help us to retain the information so that we can be better Black Americans. Everybody get my point? Yeah? Are we streaming? Okay. Awesome. So, not going to be long. We're just going to go over certain points. You can ask questions if you have them. But let's get into this. So, why is history important? I love history for a very specific reasons. And one of the reasons is because it grounds us. It centers us, it focuses us. When you learn history, that is the foundation that you should be using to build on and up from there. So if we know that XYZ happened, and let's say we know that the slaves were free in 1865, okay, that's where we're starting. We build on there to get to the next point. You see what I'm saying? So the time we live in today, there is an assault on facts. There's an assault on truth. Have you noticed that? Right? All of this fake news business that's going around. And I say fake news with the air quotes for a reason, right? So at the same time, and here's why it's dangerous, at the same time that there's an assault on truth, there is a thirst for knowledge. And so you have both of those things coming together, and having both of those things happen at the same time is a breeding ground for deception. Because if I'm looking for information to learn and to feed myself with, and the only thing out there that's prevalent is fake news, then I'm already starting with deception, right? The opposite of truth isn't a lie, it's deception. If I went outside and I brought you all outside and I said the sky is purple, you can easily tell me no. I can see it from myself. The sky is blue. But if I keep telling you, no, you see, you missed it. It was purple, but before y'all came out here, it switched back to blue. And I keep telling you that over and over and over again. At certain points, you're going to start to believe me. Perfect example, Genesis 3 and 2. The serpent didn't come up to Eve saying, God said you could eat from the tree. No, because that was a blatant lie, right? She would have been able to say, I know that's not right. He said don't eat from the tree. But what did he say? What did God really say? Right? He asked a question that was almost had a little bit of truth in there. Oh no, he didn't say you're gonna die. Right? It's not an outright lie, it's deception. And so what's happening right now is that deception is plaguing our nation. Because with the rise of wanting to know information, the millennial generation, we grew up with the internet. We know how to Google. We know how to find information. We know how to research. We know how to use the computer. And so with the rise of all of that information, but the information that we're getting is all, I don't know if that's really true or not. So we're in a state of deception right now, which is why, okay, we're streaming. Use your words wisely, Taylor. Which is why Make America Great Again attracted so many people. Did y'all know that 45 is not the author of that phrase? He did not come up with Make America Great Again. Neither did Roger Stone. You know where it came from? Ronald Reagan. You can YouTube Ronald Reagan speeches and you will hear him say, "We're going to make America great again." It worked for him and it worked for 45. Why? Because of deception. I alone can save you. Look at all those people over there stealing your job, taking your money. Even though you, sir, fake billionaire, are the one that's taking my money. But nope, deception. Look at all them people. They're stealing your jobs. That's why they're coming over here. They're coming over here to take your jobs, coming over here to take your money. So we gotta make America great again. And millions of people fell for the okie doke. Why? Because of deception. If I say things enough, have you ever noticed that all of them catchphrases aren't more than 4 words? Build the wall, lock her up. Short and sweet. Why? Because he had to be able to remember it. So sorry. So history has a chance of repeating itself when we don't learn from our past. That's one of the reasons why I love history. Because if I can go back and look at what this person did and this person did and figure out why they failed, then I can take the reason why they failed, use it, and succeed. That's what history is supposed to do for us. However, we keep repeating the same cycles because we don't learn from our mistakes. So if you think about it, history has repeated itself, right? That's why if you stay at home this weekend and you just watch TV, I guarantee you will come across a Watergate documentary or a show about Watergate or a show about Richard Nixon. Why? Because they're pointing back to the time where we had a criminal in the White House, right? That's the only thing we can compare it to. He stood up there and lied just like 45 did. You need to know if your president is a crook. I am not a crook. Yes, sir, you are. You are a crook. So the reason that the Russia investigation, anytime you hear them talking about it, can you go to that side, please? Anytime you hear them talking about the Russia investigation, you'll hear some kind of Watergate synonym, if you will. Right? They'll say, "Oh, what we're calling in John Dean." John Dean has never had this much attention since Watergate. But as soon as the Russia investigation hit, him, Bob Woodward, Carl Bernstein, all of them came back into play. Why? Because we're looking back in our past to try to figure out what we did then so we can guide our steps now. Same thing with the Kavanaugh hearings. When Professor Blasey Ford testified against Judge Kavanaugh, or as I like to call him, Judge Kavanaugh, N-A-W. You kept hearing about Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas. Why? Because those situations were eerily similar. You had a professor, a woman of stature and means, bringing up charges and you every single time, no matter what channel you were on, even Fox Opinions. I don't call them news. They don't do news. I call it Fox Opinions. Every single time you would hear them talking about the investigation. You heard them talking about Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas. Why? Because we're looking towards the past to try to figure out what we need to do now. There's a reason why we knew what to do when Trayvon Martin got killed. Because we had Emmett Till. Same thing. 2 boys cut down in their prime because of an accusation, because of their perceived threat. Not adults. Emmett Till was 14. Trayvon Martin was 17 years old. Walking home with an Arizona can and Skittles. And what did he do? He was stalked. He was pursued. Why? Because of the color of his skin. Deemed inherently a threat. That boy wasn't paying you no attention. I'll never forget after the trial, and they asked the jury, "Why did you acquit? Why did you find him not guilty?" And this Caucasian lady sat there and fixed her mouth to say, "Didn't you hear him screaming?" Meaning George Zimmerman. He was screaming. I couldn't get over that. I went home and I cried myself to sleep because all I could hear was George Zimmerman screaming for help. I'm sorry, what? Who was screaming? Thank you. That was not George screaming. In the documentary that Jay-Z produced for Paramount, his mother tells when she first heard that tape, she had to leave because she recognized instantly that was her son screaming. In the same situation, Emmett Till, he ain't do nothing to that lady. Let's talk about white privilege for a little while. White privilege can say, "Oh, he whistled at me. He tried to grab me." 14-year-old boy. 14. Yes. They went and got him from his uncle's house. He was there. He was in Money, Mississippi, visiting family. He was from Chicago. He did not know anything about the South and their culture, which I don't like that narrative where it's kind of like, oh, he didn't know how to interact with white people because he was from the North. No, that lady said she has admitted that she lied. In a book, I read the book called The Blood of Emmett Till. The author went to her house and asked her to recount the tale. And the immediate thing that came out of her mouth was, he didn't deserve to die like that. Okay, can we arrest her and put her in jail now? I'm just saying. Right? But what is it? Your blackness is deemed a threat. She made one statement, and her husband and her brother-in-law went and pulled a 14-year-old out of his own house, beat him to a pulp, tied a cotton mill around his neck, and threw him in the river. His body was so mutilated, thankfully he had on a ring that his mother gave him because that was the only thing that he could be identified with. That's how messed up his face was. And it was Mamie Till's decision to have an open casket funeral. No, I want them to see what they did to my little boy. At a Kojic church. Emmett Till's funeral was at a Kojic church. If you watch the video, you'll see everybody in their collars and stuff. Only Kojic people will get why that's important. But she had that open casket funeral and shocked the nation. People were falling out. You know, black people, we can get real dramatic. Okay, so we were on that. Just, Lord Jesus, no. But that sparked the second part of the civil rights movement. His death kicked everything off. And when I went to the Black History Museum in Washington, there's this beautiful exhibit. It's the only place you can't take pictures of. It has its original casket in there, and you walk in, and I was like, "Yep, nope, can't do it. Gotta go." Because they set the scene. They got Mahalia singing, and it's too much. But on the wall, I'll never forget. Adjacent to his casket is a quote from Mamie Till, and she said, "I used to watch the news and shake my head and say, that's their problem. You know, all that voting rights stuff, all that civil rights, that's their problem. I don't need to get involved with that." Until Emmett got killed. Then it was, we got to do something about this, right? It hits home when it's something that your son, whoo. But that's the power of black women. We were able to go on, right? So here's the thing. This is what I want you to think about for the remaining of our time. It's not going to be too much longer. Prejudice is an emotional commitment to, as a colloquial thing, not ignorant, meaning not knowing, the absence of knowledge. So I want us to be able, at the end of this discussion, if you will, to find a way, even if it's just one thing that you can come up with to help somebody. And because I know y'all know at least one person who this applies to. I know a couple people that just ignorant, not in a demeaning way, just they lack the knowledge about certain things. And so I want you to come up with at least one thing that you can do to help someone in your circle, in your life, an associate, a friend, break that commitment with ignorance. Okay? All right. So as I said, I gave this year a theme because I wanted to have a narrowed focus in order to help us ensure retention. Right? On its own, it's good to learn about the facts, but it's even better when we can take specific examples from our past, study them, and then use those lessons to guide us into our future. So let's get into it. How many people in here, I know there's a lot of women in here who may not want to answer, but how many people in here are under the age of 49? Under the age of 49. No. Anybody, men and women. How many people in here are under the age of 49? Social media fam, you can type in the comments. If you are under the age of 49, I want you to signify yourself. All right, keep those hands raised. Everybody who you see with their hands raised are the only people in here who were born technically free with all of their rights. In our immediate family, I am the first generation to be born with all of my rights. And I'm going to explain what I mean. So, this year is important because it marks the 400th year of when the first 20 Africans landed in Jamestown, Virginia. 20 Africans were brought on a ship to what? Help build America. They were traded for food. That was the price of 20 Africans. A box of bread. Those 20 Africans, by the time that the Emancipation Proclamation, the Civil War, and the 13th Amendment comes, those 20 Africans swell into 4 million people. So from 1619 to 1865, we go from 20 people to 4 million. So, if we start with 1619 and we go to, let's say, 1864, your freedom was determined based upon the status of your mother. So if your mother was a slave, then you were a slave. If your mother was free, then you were free. Why the mother? Why not the father? Hint. Give me some suggestions. Why the mother? She bore you? Yes. A little bit more sinister than that, though. Because black men weren't nothing. Possibly. They went by the status of the mother because in a lot of cases, the father was a slave holder. Was a slave owner. Oh, yeah. You're getting what I'm putting down now. You're picking up what I'm putting down. In a lot of cases, and I mean a lot, the father was often the one in the big house. That is where we get the mulattoes from. Yeah. Lola got it. She's, oh. Yes. That is why your freedom was based off of the woman. Because the woman was in bondage. Most times, the male was not. Which is why it tickles me to no end where we get this big, black, sinister, I want to get you white woman stereotype from. Because the biggest rapists were were the white people in the house, men and women. Okay, it wasn't just the men, it was the women too. They were the ones who we feared. It is highly documented that at most times during the Middle Passage in slave ships, women would often mutilate themselves to try to appear less desirable, to try to break down their organ systems and their ovaries and their uterus to not produce children because they knew that they were going to get raped. Oftentimes we're dealing with 10, 12, 14 weeks on those ships where it's just a whole bunch of chained up Africans in the bottom, and you were at the mercy of whoever it was that was steering those ships. So that is why your freedom was not by your father. It was often it was determined by the mother, because there were a lot of mixed race children out there. So if it went by your father, there would have been a lot of more free black people than they realized. Okay? These people knew what they were doing. The British did not invent slavery, but they sure enough perfected it. Just like the Romans. They did not invent crucifixion, but they sure enough perfected it. Yes. But the British knew. They took that system, even though slavery prior to Britain coming into the slave trade was not based on race. It was not based on the color of your skin or anything like that. It was usually, I won the war, you didn't, now you're my slave. Or I'm in debt, I can't pay it off, so I'll work for you for X amount of years and then I'll let you go. But the British, they were like, no, we got something for you. So from 1619 to 1864, and I'm using 1864 for a reason, even though the 13th Amendment was signed or ratified, if you will, in 1865, I'm using 1864 as the endpoint for a specific person. So once we get to 1865, slavery is abolished through the 13th Amendment, not the Emancipation Proclamation. Yes, the Emancipation Proclamation did set some slaves free, but you had to be in a state that was controlled by the Union during the Civil War. So that did not free all slaves. It freed many, but not all. So once we get to the 13th Amendment, that is the constitutional amendment that abolished slavery, kinda. And I'll explain why I say kinda in a second. So between these two, the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment, you now have 4 million free black people running around America. So from 1865 to 1876, we have a period called Reconstruction. This was the time in which the South literally reconstructed itself, right? It had been ravished by the Civil War. Buildings have been torn down. Cities have been burned down. So they were in the process of not only reconstructing their cities and their states, but also rejoining into the Union. But for black people, Reconstruction is the first time we really see black advancement in America. And here's what I mean by that. It was during Reconstruction that some 2,000 African American people served from the local to the federal level in Congress, state legislatures, state senators, okay, with the Reconstruction Amendment. That's the 13th, 14th, and 15th. 13th Amendment abolished slavery. 14th Amendment made us human. Right? Technically, in the language, it made us citizens, but because the Constitution deemed us 3/5 of a person, or 60% of a human, there had to be an amendment added to the Constitution to make black people no longer property, but human. That is what the 14th Amendment really did. Then there was the 15th Amendment, which on paper allowed all men the right to vote. There's a reason why I said on paper, because if it really was enacted, there would be no reason for the Civil Rights Movement in 1964 and 1965. Right? If the 15th Amendment really did grant all men, and then later on women got the right to vote, there should be no reason for a Fannie Lou Hamer or Ella Baker or a Diane Nash, because we should have already had that right to vote, because on paper we did. It just wasn't enacted, right? So back to Reconstruction. It was during that time where we see black advancement, okay? These black men get the right to vote, and because Abraham Lincoln was a Republican, we pledged our allegiance at the time, okay, to the Republican Party, right? They used to call Uncle Abe was a Republican. He done set us free, so now we's Republicans, okay? And they didn't just vote. They got bold. See, that's why I love black people. Well, now we're not gonna stop at voting. I'm gonna run. I'm gonna take over the post mail system. I'm gonna take over the state legislature. I'm gonna go and run for U.S. Senate. I'm gonna go and run for governor. I'm gonna go and sit on the Congress. And they did. 2,000 African Americans during the time from 1865 to 1876, they served in Congress. A total of 265 African American delegates were elected, and more than 100 of whom were born into slavery. So we're talking about people who were born slaves who are now in the United States Senate, the United States Congress, different state legislatures. Can you imagine that? You were born property, and then something changes, and now you sit on the U.S. Senate. That's amazing. People like Hiram Rhodes Revels. He is our first black U.S. Senator from the state of, guess. Georgia? No. Philadelphia? Virginia? South Carolina? In the South. I'll give you that. It is in the South. No, they way too racist for that. Mississippi. He was, he said how? Yes, he was the first black U.S. congressman from Mississippi, and here's where it just gets so much juicier for me. You know who seat he took? Jefferson Davis. And for those of you who don't know who Jefferson Davis is, that would be the president of the Confederate States. Yes, sir. This here black man took the U.S. Senate state from Jefferson Davis. Now, I'm sorry. I love that. The petty in me loves that. This was 1861. Okay? So this is before the proclamation. This is before the 13th Amendment. Okay? I love it. I'm okay. Then we have Blanche K. Bruce. He was a senator from Mississippi, elected in 1865. Can you go to that next slide? So oftentimes, because not just there wasn't just rampant illiteracy within the black community, there was a rampant illiteracy period, right? Because in the words of Roland Martin, there's a lot of broke white people out there who just couldn't read, okay? So oftentimes, most of the papers, the newspapers, were pictures, because you don't have to read to look at a picture, okay? So this is, of course, colored, but this picture's, who do you think that is in the middle? Frederick Douglass, And Hiram is on your left, and then that is Blanche Bruce on the right. The three heroes of the Reconstruction era. That is what this picture was depicting. The radical Republicans. And if you can see up there, I don't know if you can see, but there's a picture of Abraham Lincoln in there. There's depictions of the Black Union soldiers, and on the bottom it's people being freed from slavery, and then on this side it's Black people in church, because that's one thing we know how to do is go to church. So there were some 600 plus state legislators in during this time in Reconstruction, and a lot of those people who were elected, the majority really of those 2,000 people who were able to serve during the Reconstruction period, where did they come from? The church. Hiram Ruffles was a pastor. Blanche K. Bruce was very active in his church as well. Church people, that's what we know how to do. We know how to go to church. So the thing that I love about this is that despite fear, despite trepidation, despite backlash, they were able to use their new constitutional right to vote and to change the nation. So they went to work, right? You got these people being elected to positions within the government, but not only that, because Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, his vice president, in an attempt to show unity and to show that, there was no bad blood, Abraham Lincoln had elected a Southerner, a slaveholder, as his vice president. Of course, he didn't think that he was going to be assassinated right after the Civil War, so he thought that he was going to be able to put his Reconstruction plan forward, although it wasn't much of a Reconstruction plan, as he just wanted to send us all back to Africa. Thank you for working and building our country. You can go back where you came from. That was his Reconstruction plan. But Lincoln was assassinated, and we get Andrew Johnson as president. And like I said, he was a slaveholder. And he basically allowed the southern states to come back into the Union, no repercussions, no nothing. And he allowed the Democrats to take control of a lot of the southern governments and basically push out the new African American voters. And so what those African American voters did was push him out. Not only was Andrew Johnson impeached, he was also not reelected for a second term. Why? Because there was a surge of Black voters who were like, so long, bye-bye. And they elected in turn who? The winning general of the Union Army of the Civil War, Ulysses S. Grant. However, that's not Ulysses, that's a different white man. Ulysses S. Grant was a good president in terms of his want to help Black people, his want to help. He actually was able to stop the Ku Klux Klan from rising. However, he liked the wine just a little bit too much, and he allowed some crooks to be around him, and his second term was like mired in scandal and stuff. It was bad. It was real bad. And so the election of 1876, you can put that other white man up. Thank you. 1876, we have the election. New election. Ulysses S. Grant is on his way out. So now with the Republicans, they put up this guy who is behind me. His name is, does anybody know? Nope. Nobody knows your presidents? Come on, Corey, you in school, homie. No? I only know Barack Obama and Abraham Lincoln. His name is Rutherford B. Hayes. The Democratic candidate was Samuel Tilden. The Democratic candidate was Samuel Tilden. This guy is Rutherford B. Hayes. Here is where things get sticky. Election is held. People vote. All of a sudden, there comes these weird results coming out of where? It's always Florida. What is wrong with Florida? We can never get it right when it comes to elections. But not just Florida, South Carolina and Louisiana too. The Democrats wouldn't let a lot of their black people vote. And so they basically sent in two different election results. It was so close, based off of the Electoral College, Samuel Tilden was winning. He was ahead in the popular vote by 250,000 votes. He was ahead in the Electoral College by only one vote. At the time, America wasn't as big, so there were only 185 Electoral College votes back then. Samuel Tilden had 185. Rutherford B. Hayes had 184. So then, because it was so close, Congress puts together an electoral commission. They get 5 U.S. senators, 5 U.S. representatives, 5 Supreme Court justices. 7 of them are Democrat, 7 of them are Republican, and 1 is an independent. They go in the room, and what they were supposed to do was recount the votes so that they could know who won the election. However, here's where the shady thing comes in. Hayes' people goes to the moderate Democrat, right? So it's like they're not racist, they're just racist, right? So they go to the moderate Democrats and they say, "Listen, let's make a deal." Okay? How many of y'all like that show? Let's make a deal. We will give you the election. The Democrats said, or Hayes people said, if you let us win the election, you guys take the federal troops out of the South. The remaining federal troops that are in the South, you got to let them go. And you got to appoint a Democrat to your cabinet, and we will allow the Negroes to vote. This is an actual quote. The Negroes to vote. Hayes wins the election only because they said yes to that compromise. So it wasn't decided by the commission that was set up by Congress. It was set up, the election was basically decided by people who were in the room where it happened. That was a Hamilton quote for you. You're welcome. So this is where we can draw the lesson. Because Samuel Tilden lost not by the popular vote, but by the Electoral College vote. There have been 4 times where that happened. And we know of the most recent time because that's how we got orangey, right? Donald Trump, because that's his real name, won not by the popular vote. He won by the Electoral College. Why do we have an Electoral College? Because of slavery. Southern states didn't want to give up their control. Northern states didn't want to get pummeled in every single election, so they make a compromise. We will allow black people to become 3/5 of a person, 60% of a person, and we will give each state a number of delegates, because what they said on paper was, normal people, they won't even able to know who's going on and what's going on in government and who these people are. Regular farmers out in Kentucky and Minnesota, they don't know who these people are. So we have to be the ones to make sure that we're sending the right people to the White House. That is why we have an electoral college system. That is why we have the 45th president of the United States that we have. And it was perfected. That method was perfected in 1876. So because they made that compromise, because Hayes was able to give up control of the South, which is what he did, by allowing the Union troops to leave the South, we have the resurgence of the KKK. We have the resurgence of the terrorism that the KKK ensued upon black people, especially black people who dared to have the mind to vote. And that is one of the reasons why we have the mass exodus of black people leaving the South and going to other states. They were not just going to see what was over in California. They were refugees. They were leaving persecution. They were fleeing persecution. And one of the main reasons why they were fleeing persecution is because this man decided that he was going to steal the White House. And so for the rest of his term, most people called him Rutherford B. Hayes, which tickles me to no end. But that was the compromise of 1877. And it is important because we realize just how easily democracy can be averted. Because the U.S. is supposed to be built on the principle that all men are created equal and that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights and that every vote counts. Not really. Kinda. So, 1877 kicks off the era of the black codes and Jim Crow. Because those Southern troops, because those federal troops were taken out of the South, the KKK and other white supremacist organizations were able to rain terror on black people and anybody who decided to even somewhat think about helping these black people. But the thing about black people is that we always survive. We always thrive in the midst of persecution, in the midst of terror, in the midst of depravity. We continue to strive. There was, 6 different millionaires. And there were more, but there were at least 6 millionaires during this time. In the same time that there was a resurgence of the KKK, there were black people who were putting their minds to work and making their money. Okay? We're going to talk about them in a little bit. So from 1876 to 1964, basically, we are under the era of Jim Crow. What is Jim Crow? Help me out. What is Jim Crow? Sum it up for me. Yes, no, maybe? Cat got your tongue? He's Googling. Jim Crow. You know, but you don't know. Jim Crow were just simply a bunch of stupid laws. Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal. Right? The reason that there were signs that say colored and whites only, which never made any sense to me because white is a color. It's like colored and white. Like, I can't say that. I'm being streamed. Okay. Separate but equal. Right? You can't go in this building. There's a white library. There's a black library. There's a white movie theater. There's a black movie theater. There are white schools. There are black schools. That's Jim Crow. The era of supposed separate but equal. Of course, we know it was just separate. It was never equal. Right? It was a tactic that was able to keep black people at second-class citizen status. Right? The 15th Amendment gave us the right to vote. The 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote. Yet, by the time we get to 1961, like 0.5% of the people in Mississippi, of the black population in Mississippi, were not just eligible to vote, but were registered voters. Right? They put in systems like literacy tests and poll taxes and basically full frontal intimidation. Sheriffs would literally come in the room where you were taking your test and say, Annie Mae, don't you work for my grandmother down at the old folks home? She would not be happy if she knew you were down here voting. Right? They will put your name in the paper when you attempted to register to vote. Not just your name, your address, your telephone number. And then the KKK will put out something called a burning cross alert. So all those names that were in the newspaper, all those addresses that were printed in the newspaper, the KKK would go and bomb your house or bring you outside and beat you up. Or, depending on how drunk or bold they were, they would just kill you, string you up because you registered to vote. Attempted to register to vote. Why attempted? Because all of that power was held with the person who was sitting in the seat at City Hall. The City Hall clerk had all of the power. He or she could look at you and determine whether or not you were going to become a registered voter that day. He or she had full power over which questions he or she could ask you. Questions like, what does the 6th clause of the 3rd Amendment of the Constitution say? Who knows that? You don't even know that. Name all of the state judges in Alaska. I'm sorry, what? We live in Alabama. They had all power, which is why you see the reemergence really of the civil rights movement. But here's my thing. Before we got to the civil rights movement, before we had the protests to allow us to vote, to allow us to sit at lunch counters and to be able to order food like normal human beings. Before we had the right to fight for that, we first had to fight for humanity. What do I mean by that? Before we could even get to I'm a human and I have rights, we had to convince people that we were human. Because the Constitution of the United States in which we lived determined us as property. We were equal in the eyes of the law as cattle. So before we could even get to talking about voting rights, we had to first discuss human rights. Sojourner Truth, ain't I a woman? Why was there a need for her to say that? Like, clearly we can see that you're a woman. Why? Because the first thing that people saw wasn't the fact that she was a woman, it was the fact that she was black. So the first fight for freedom was human. Hi, I'm a human. Nice to meet you. And we're seeing that same fight again. It is the reason why we have to go out chanting after a cop kills another one of unarmed black men or black women. We have to go out singing what? Black Lives Matter. It's the same thing, just a different decade. So by the time we get into Jim Crow, yes, we've made some strides. Yes, we have certain freedoms. But at the fundamental level, when it came to the South, we were absolutely second-class citizens. And so that is why we have the Civil Rights Movement, where we see Rosa Parks and Dr. King and Diane Nash and Fannie Lou Hamer and Jim Lawson and James Bevel and John Lewis, my man. We see all of those people emerge. Why? Because we had to fight for our rights. And I mean fight. I wholeheartedly reject the fact that the nonviolence movement is a passive movement. Nonviolence is the most aggressive type of movement that you can have. And I'm going to explain myself a little bit more later. But they didn't just go out and protest and fight and sit in or pray or walk down streets. That wasn't what they were doing. The real tactic was how they used the media to get their message across. But I'm jumping ahead of myself, right? So from 1876 or 1878 rather, to the 1964, we have Jim Crow. Then we see the emergence of the acts. So we have the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and then the 1968 Fair Housing Act. So 1964, but here's the thing, with all of these acts, here's the pattern, right? That's what I do. I look for the patterns when I'm going through history. The pattern is, for every advancement that was made, black blood had to be shed. So the 1964 Civil Rights Act, President Kennedy wasn't assassinated, right? And I know y'all like, he's not black though, so. Right? So President Kennedy was assassinated. Lyndon B. Johnson, although he was a staunch Southerner and somewhat racist, he used the word more than most black people do now. He was able to push through the 1964 Voting Rights Act, not just because of President Kennedy's legacy and memory, but because Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement continued to put pressure on him. Right? And we did so with Kennedy too, because he made that grand speech after the Freedom Riders and the bus was bombed and the people were doing all of their, the white racists were, beating them all over the head. And he made this nice speech and he said he can wipe away the civil rights problem with a pen. As soon as he has his signature, he can use the pen, put his signature down, he could evaporate all of the problems of the black people. Time went on and black people started to send him pens in the mail. Did you forget, bruh? He made that speech in 61. Up until his death, literally, pens were coming in the mail every day. Like you said, all you needed was a pen and you could put your signature on it and you would wipe it away. You still haven't done it. Which is interesting to me because most people have a picture of Jesus, JFK, Martin Luther King, and now Barack Obama in their house. But my question to you is, what did Kennedy do for the black people? I'll wait. Lyndon B. Johnson technically did more for us than Kennedy did. It's just Kennedy was prettier. Kennedy was pretty, so it's like, yeah, we'll take him. But when it came to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, what I mean about black blood being shed is that those protesters were getting beaten every day, okay? John Lewis's book details and chronicles just how bad. He was beaten over the head with a metal pipe. People would take barbed wire, put it around a pole, and literally beat men and women who were just riding on the buses with white people. Okay? This is what I mean by black blood having to be shed. And not necessarily always having someone to die, but I'm just talking about regular protesting and encountering the KKK or any other white supremacist citizens council. Just regular evangelical Christians. I'm sorry, I said that out loud, didn't I? Black blood had to be shed with every single advancement. So Kennedy dies. The protests keep happening. The Freedom Riders, their buses are bombed. The mob attack with them. Black blood is shed. Then with the 1965 Voting Rights Act, we just celebrated the 54th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. And it's called Bloody Sunday for a reason. They were marching peacefully, quietly, 2 by 2, on the sidewalk, not disrupting anything. That's why it kills me when the newscasters say today, oh, the Black Lives Matter people, they're so disruptive. It wouldn't matter. Whether they were disruptive or not, you'd still do the same thing. Roll a car down the street. Exactly. They're on the sidewalk. And John Lewis tells it, Hosea Williams looked at him and said, can you swim? And He said, nope. Because the only other way, they couldn't turn around because there was too many of them. They couldn't go forward because all of the white militia was standing in front of them, right? The KKK linked up with the police and the sheriff's department. And the sheriff literally deputized white terrorists for that specific event. He made them basically cops for a day just so that they could beat these protesters. Specifically for that one protest. They were fine, John Lewis said, until they reached that top of the bridge and they saw just a sea of white people. White people on horses, white people in cars, white people on the ground, everywhere. John Lewis, and this is what they're so organized. John Lewis asks, sir, we have the right to protest. All we want to do is cross. We're not following anybody. They said, turn around. This is an unlawful protest. Turn around. Disband. Said, okay, can we just pray? They were going to kneel and pray. They wouldn't even let them do that. The next thing that John Lewis heard was advance. They put their gas mask on. They were protected. The black people were not. That is why it's called Bloody Sunday. John Lewis was hit with a baton by a police officer. People were trampled by horses. People were beaten by cops who were supposed to protect and serve. There's a reason it's called Bloody Sunday. For every single advancement, black blood had to be shed. So we have Bloody Sunday. That was back in, I don't know nothing about these days, but they tell me that TV used to go off. It's so sad. There was only 3 channels back then anyway. Apparently I have some witnesses over here. ABC, NBC, and CBS. They said they were showing, the movie was Judgment at Nuremberg. It's a movie, interestingly enough, about the trial of the Nazi officers. So the movie was playing and never happened before. They cut into the movie with the breaking news. Live from Selma, Alabama. Well, not live, but from Selma, Alabama, we have this special news. And they showed the images of these cops pummeling the black protesters. People in their homes. Now you had, they couldn't act like they didn't know anymore. You were literally confronted with those images of seeing people trampled, seeing people beaten, women with their heads busted open. For what? Just because, like Fannie Lou Hamer said when she testified at the DNC, all because we want the right to vote? That's it? That's what I'm getting beat for? Really? They cut into the movie and they show those images. Bloody Sunday. 54 years this week. 54 years. And those images, we could play it side by side. You could put Bloody Sunday on one side and Ferguson on the other. You could put Bloody Sunday on one side and Baltimore on the other. You could put Bloody Sunday on one side and Sacramento on the other. Right? These things are still happening. So we got the 1964 Civil Rights Act. The 1965 Voting Rights Act was mainly pushed through because of what happened on Bloody Sunday. Y'all got Lyndon Johnson able to say, we shall overcome. And then the 1968 Fair Housing Act, that was only pushed through because Martin Luther King was assassinated. It is no secret that Johnson and King were not on speaking terms when Martin Luther King was assassinated. That's probably why he killed him. Said that out loud. The only reason we have a Fair Housing Act is because of the death of Martin Luther King. Lyndon Johnson said that he was going to make something good come out of the death of such a great man. He was able to push through the Fair Housing Act, which, on paper, again, demolished the blatant discrimination that real estate agents and brokers were using. Martin Luther King has a speech where he It is not Masonic Temple. It was Mason Temple Church of God in Christ in Memphis, Tennessee. On April 3rd, 1968, Dr. King told about how he went to Chicago and he brought his work there. It was different for him because he was used to the South. Now he was dealing with Northern racists. Now that's a whole nother type of racist. That's not blatant racism. That's smile in your face. Hi, how are you? So nice to meet them. Right? Southern racist is blatant. Call you an N-word to your face. Northern racists, they do it behind your back. There's a line that I loved in the Marshall movie with Chadwick Boseman. Said the only difference between a Southern bigot and a Northern bigot is the accent. So, when Dr. King brought the movement to Chicago, he didn't really know what he was getting himself into because he was dealing with a whole nother type of white supremacists. And he said they would go down to the real estate office and they would say, we're looking at this house. And they were like, oh, it's not available. We're so sorry. Try back next time. I'll give you a call if I see something for you. And the black people would leave and then he would send one of his white workers in there. And they would open up the book. Hey, we got this property for you right here. Right? So that's what the Fair Housing Act was supposed to demolish. And the reason that we have that is because Martin Luther King was assassinated on April 4th, 1968 at the Lorraine Motel. It cost us black blood for every single advancement that we made. Do not forget that black people fought in every single war that this country has ever fought in, from the Revolutionary War to the Indian War to the War of Vietnam to World War I and World War II, which was so bad that we had to sit behind Nazis. American soldiers, black American soldiers, still had to sit in the back of the bus and sit behind prisoners of war. So every single advancement, black blood had to be shed. So that is what I meant when I said I am the first person in my immediate family to be born with all of my rights. Because I was born after 1969. Because without the 1964, the 1965, and the 1968 acts, I was technically not born with all of my rights. It wasn't until those three things passed, including with the Reconstruction Amendment, that black people were born, on paper, fully free. So let's use, if you will, 1970 as the marker, right? Everything started to take place. So all of those three acts had time to kick in. Affirmative action took place. So if we're using 1970 as the marker to where people, African Americans, were born fully free, that is only 49 years. Out of the 200 and some odd years that this country has been established, black people have only had all of their rights for 49 of those years. 49. And we had to fight for each one of those years. And still fighting. So, call me crazy, but I think that it's time to abolish the 13th Amendment. But That's what Kanye said, right? Um, this special person, he went on Twitter and he went on Twitter one day and he was free. He was free thinking because black people, we need to think freely. We got to get off the plantation. We got to think freely. Okay, he was thinking freely, and he decided to tweet out that it is time to abolish the 13th Amendment, which is the amendment that set us free from slavery. So I guess he wanted to send us back to slavery because slavery was a choice anyway. And so if we abolish the 13th Amendment, then maybe we can choose not to be slaves the next time. I figured it out. I'm just kidding. But he, he had, he later clarified or attempted to clarify his point, saying that basically the 13th Amendment is just slavery by another name, which is absolutely true. Because if you read the words of the 13th Amendment, it says that all persons shall be free except by punishable with a crime, meaning that mass incarceration, the prison system, is the new slavery. If you were to be arrested and spend time in jail, when you come out, Michelle Alexander wrote a whole book, which I encourage you all to read. It is the new Jim Crow. You can't vote. You can't own property. If you're convicted of a felony, yes. Yes, Florida, Amendment 4 was passed in Florida. However, Andrew Gillum did not win the election. So, Ron DeSantis has not put the law into action yet. Some people have been able to register to vote, but not all of them, not the 1.4 million that they kept saying, because Ron DeSantis said that he needed more clarification on the words that were written on the paper. Somehow the words weren't clear. The words weren't clear. But then that made sense to me because, like, if you admire 45 that much, he don't read either, so I can get why it would be a little bit confusing for him. But what I mean this time by abolishing the 13th Amendment or abolishing slavery is the way we think about slavery. I am about sick and tired of slave movies. Okay, I don't want a 12 years a slave. I don't want a Roots. Give me Django. Because they kill all the white people in the end. That's all I'm saying. But the way we think about slavery, the way we talk about it, right? Every time we talk about slavery, I'm sure all of y'all heard Mahalia in your head singing Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, or Follow the Drinking Gourd, right? We get real regressive in our thinking of slavery, and especially the way it's treated in schools. I can't stand it. They got one little paragraph in there about how we were slaves, and then Harriet Tubman set us free, and then Martin Luther King set us all free, and then racism ended with Barack Obama. That is basically how it is treated in schools. When we talk about slavery, it's this dejection and subjugation, and you were this, and that. What we don't talk about is how many people fought back. What we don't talk about are the rebellions. What we don't talk about is the fact that even though it was illegal for us to assemble together, there were whole churches on plantations. We don't talk about the fact that even though we were not allowed to read and write, we were reading and writing. That we don't talk about the victorious through oppression, right? We don't talk about the resilience of the slaves that were able to come to a brand new country that they did not know, which the language that they did not speak, but were able to build an entire culture. But were able to establish families. That's where the jumping the broom thing comes from. We weren't allowed to get married. That's why we jumped the broom. We couldn't have rings. We jumped the broom. It was symbolic. We don't talk about the fact that we are a resilient bunch of people. So yes, slavery was awful, horrible, horrendous. But in that, there were victors. There were people like Frederick Douglass who escaped. There were people like Harriet Tubman who escaped and then had the audacity to go back and then escape again and then go back and then escape again and then became a spy for the Union Army during the Civil War. Right? We don't talk about those things. We talk about swing low, sweet chariot, and we talk about following the North Star, which kudos to them, because if you ask me to go outside and point out the North Star, I mean, whole astrologists, okay? They all look bright to me, okay? So yes, there was horrible things going on. But in the midst of that, historians believe that about 1,000 slaves attempted to escape every year. Right? Because like Sister Dolores said, Kanye said that 400 years though, that sounds like a choice. Like nobody escaped. Yes, retard. People escaped. About 1,000 people tried to escape every year. Harriet Tubman herself set 300 to 400 slaves free after being heartbroken by her jerk of a husband. Sorry, I'm still not over that. That messes me up every single time. She married somebody who was free. The Tubman from her name, she married somebody who was free, and he played her and married a whole nother woman. She went back to go get her family, okay? She trying to set her people free. And you over there laid up with somebody else? Come on, man. But Harriet Tubman herself, through the Underground Railroad, set about 300 slaves free. Total, like grand total, there were over about 100,000 slaves who made it from slavery to freedom. Whether they went just to the north or whether they went all the way to the north and ended up in Canada, they were escaping. Yes, Kanye. They tried to run. Most were successful, some not. Some. Now, I want us to honor the strength of Black women. And I'll tell you what I mean. Slavery was hard for everyone, but it was even harder for Black women because it wasn't just the physical work that we had to endure. It was the emotional and the physical work that we had to endure after the physical work was already done, if you catch what I mean. Black women were at the mercy of the overseers, over the slave owners, basically over any white male that was around them. If you watch the show Underground, it used to come on. Unfortunately, they canceled it. One of the most poignant lines to me in the first episode was that she was talking to her daughter and she said, "You don't know real fear until you've had children." And it's not, she said, "It was different with your brothers, but when I had you, I prayed to God that you weren't pretty." Because they were in the house, they were lighter skinned, So they were in the house. And she said, "I prayed to God that you weren't pretty." because you don't know real fear until you've had children. And that's made evident by this story. There's a woman named Margaret Garner. She was a slave. She escaped. The next slide. Yeah. She escaped with her family. They did it in the winter time. They had to cross the Ohio River. Thankfully, because it was winter, the entire river was frozen solid. And so they were able to, step by step, go over into free Ohio territory. But they were chased. They were being chased by the slave catchers. They made it to freedom. There was a guy, a black man, allowed them to come into their house. They were free for all of 2 hours before they heard a knock on the door. The militia was after them. They wanted to come in. They were able to bar the door for a little while. And while they were doing that, Margaret took her 3 or 4 children into the back, and she slashed the throat of her toddler daughter, and she stabbed her 2 sons. The militia entered before she was able to hurt her infant child. Her daughter died instantly. The 2 boys were able to be saved because they didn't lose that much blood. And when they come in, she said, I did the best that I can by them. And if I could, I would have done my best by all of them. What she was saying was, if you wouldn't have came in, I would have killed all of them. What state do you have to be in to be able to kill your children? That is how depraved slavery was, where you can look at your children and say, you know what? Y'all are better off dead. She was captured. She was taken to jail. But remember, as we discussed earlier, not only are you deemed free or slave by your mother, but you are not a human being. You're property. And because you are property, we cannot say that you are guilty or innocent, because who can determine the guilt or innocence of property? So she was taken back to her plantation. She was actually getting ready to be sent to the West Indies, which is basically a death sentence. Because if you think slavery was hard in the United States, you have no idea what was going on in the West Indies, which is one of the reasons why Alexander Hamilton was never a slave owner, because he saw the depravity of how slaves were treated in the West Indies, because he was from St. Kitts. Anywho, I'm sorry for that random Alexander Hamilton fact. But in the West Indies, on those sugar plantations, the average age was about 14 years old. That's how hard they worked you. That's how depraved those conditions were. How horrendous those conditions were. You wouldn't last 14 years. So she was being sent to the West Indies. Now remember, she attempted to kill all of her children. Her sons were sold to a different plantation. She and her infant daughter were being sent to the West Indies. However, on the boat, she allowed her infant child to slip into the water. So she killed both of her daughters. She made a choice. Do I let them grow up in slavery? Or do I set them free? Because as I said, after Aretha's funeral, everybody was complaining about how long it was. And I was saying, what y'all don't understand about black funerals, that it starts with slavery, where we rejoice because death was a welcomed friend. So we rejoiced when one of our brothers or sisters died, because now you can rest. And that's what a lot of people don't realize about black funerals, why we call them homegoing celebrations, is because of slavery. Because you worked all your life. So now take your rest. Right? And I had to put my boy Killmonger up there. No, he is not a bad guy. He's a misunderstood black man, okay? That's what I'm saying. He is what happens when anger has nowhere to go. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm about to tag you in. Pass you the mic. But the one of the most poignant lines in Black Panther was when Killmonger at the end says, "Just bury me in the oceans with my ancestors who jumped from the ship because they knew that death was better than bondage." That sums up the Margaret Gardner story. Death is better than bondage. And to make it even worse, this was only 2 years before the Civil War. So if she would have waited, they would have been free. But how could she have known that? She made a choice. And she said, "I did the best that I could." That's how serious slavery was. So whenever people say, "Why are we still talking about slavery?" There's a reason. That is the reason right there. There was there's a psychologist, Dr. Joy, I believe her last name is Guthrie or something like that. I'll get the exact name for you in a second. But she has this premise that black people suffer from PTSD, not post-traumatic stress disorder, but post-traumatic slave disorder. Think about it. When the Holocaust ended, there was a reckoning period for the Jews. When Japanese internment happened, there was a reckoning period for the Japanese. When South Africa apartheid ended, there were reckoning sessions for both the white and the black South Africans. Where was our reckoning period after slavery? We just went through the timeline. We went from slavery to freedom to Jim Crow. 49 years we've been, on paper, technically free. Where was the point in time where we sat down and said, all right, listen, okay, so sorry about the whole slavery thing, but this is what we're going to do. There were no reparations. There was no reconciliation. And as we're discussing now, because 45 wants to put kids in cages at the border, now we're discussing the effects of having families torn apart. Right? Now we're discussing the traumatic effects of having children torn away from their mother. Now we're having a discussion about what that does to a child's psyche, what that does to the mother's psyche, what that does to the nation's psyche. Now we're having this conversation. We didn't have that conversation after slavery. We didn't talk about the traumatic events that continued to happen after slavery. We were free, and then the KKK. Right? We were free, and then Jim Crow. There was no reckoning period for us. And so what you have is generation after generation after generation after generation that are dealing with undealt trauma. And that is the basis of her premise. Most black people have PTSD, post-traumatic slave disorder. Think about it. You don't think that Margaret Gardner had PTSD? When the Union rolled through and they set her free, now you're free, she thought about what she did to her kid. Post-traumatic slave disorder. But like I said, we're going to abolish the way we think about slavery and talk about rebellions. I want to talk about two specific ones. One of them is the Stono Rebellion, which happened in South Carolina. There was a law that was passed that on Sunday, because the slaveholders were good Christian white folk. And so they would go to church on Sunday and they would praise their white Jesus with gun on their hip, because they were allowed to be armed in the White House just in case their Negroes decided to act up. So all the good white church-going folk were in church on Sunday, and the slaves were in the back saying, all right, this is what we're going to do. While they're there in church praising their white Jesus, we're going to take this store over. We're going to get the guns from Hutchinson's store, and then we're going to go from plantation to plantation to plantation. We're going to kill every single white person that we see. We are going to join together with the other slaves, and we are going to head to freedom. Ready? Go. On Sunday, September 9th, 1739 in South Carolina, that is exactly what the Stono Rebellion was. They were led by an Angolan slave, and he was about 20 different slaves, went to Hutchinson's store, got the guns, killed all the white people in Hutchinson's, killed all the white people at their plantation, moved on to the next one. And they began to grow and grow and grow. Unfortunately, they got about 50 miles, which is a long time. I can't even walk a mile. I'm just saying. They were able to get 50 miles from Stono to Edisto before the rebellion was quashed by the white colonists. This was before America was founded, because it's 1739. So technically, South Carolina was just a British colony then. So they were able to get 50 miles, but overall, the rebellion killed about 25 white people, and the white colonists killed upwards of about 50 of the black. Hey, that's a lot more. Well, yeah, because they were larger. You got to remember, by this time, South Carolina had more black people than white people. They had more slaves than white people. In South Carolina and Mississippi and Georgia, the slaves always outnumbered the white people. So their numbers are always going to get bigger just based off of numbers. Right? So they did quash that rebellion, and the remaining were sent where? To the West Indies. But the thing about the Stono Rebellion, and with every single rebellion, which is why I said we have to abolish the way we think about slavery, is that it wasn't just you get on the ship, you're a slave for the rest of your life. No, there were many, many revolts. These people fought back. You can't take a Mandinka warrior and not expect him to fight back and to try to get back to where he came from. That is why the level of depravity increased with each passing year. That is why more and more harsh laws were passed with each passing year. That is why you see the picture of the chains around their neck and the muzzle on their faces and the chains on their feet. That is why they chained children. That is why they chained women, because they were fighting back. They had to learn the hard way that they didn't go to Africa to get slaves. They went to Africa and got people and turned them into slaves. But no black person left the continent of Africa a slave. They left engineers, they left farmers, they left scientists, they left teachers, and they became slaves. But these people were fighters, okay? So that is one of the reasons why you see more and more laws being passed as time goes on. Remember, I told you this is before America is truly established. This is a British colony. So in retaliation of that, they stopped the importing of slaves for a while. They're like, okay, let's regroup. Let's think about this thing here, because that can't happen again. Right? And so then they tried to teach them scripture. Why? Because they wanted to make them docile. Right? That's what the black nationalists say. You're serving your white Jesus over there with the slave master's religion. You can't be serving the slave master's religion. That's awesome, but it backfired on them because although they thought that they were teaching us scriptures to become docile, we were able to impart out of that the story of Moses and the children of Israel and how they escaped from freedom. We were able to identify with a slave, with a savior who was beaten like we were, who was unjustly arrested like we were, who it backfired on them. So although they thought they were teaching the slaves scripture to become docile, didn't work out that way. And they also implemented more overseers per number of slaves. And what you have to remember when we're talking about police departments now and the over-policing of black communities and the over-policing of black people, we have to remember that that started on the plantation. The first police officers were called overseers. They were the ones who were on the horse, riding around the plantation, making sure the slaves were doing their job. They were the ones who were on the horse with whip on their side, ready to crack down the punishment if they saw anybody get out of line. From those overseers, we move, as time progresses, those overseers, we rename them police officers. So it is nothing new that we have the over-policing of black bodies. It started on the plantation. Okay? Another rebellion. Nat Turner, one of my favorite. You should watch the movie Birth of a Nation. Not the racist white one, the second one. Nat Turner was a slave in Virginia. He was sold about 3 different times before he ended up at the Turner plantation. It was there that the Turners decided to show mercy to this nice looking colored boy, and they taught Nat how to read and to write, and they taught him religion. They taught him how to preach. Well, not really taught him. He basically, you're going the wrong way. Nat had this innate ability to be able to preach the word of God. So he was taken from plantation to plantation to have them have this nice black preacher teach the black slaves, servants, obey your masters in the Lord. Right? They had him. They brought him from plantation to plantation and said, listen, you got to teach your people how to be nice, good, docile slaves. And he did that for a while. But the thing where, like I said before, it backfired. So the thing about teaching him how to read and then giving him a Bible was that he read the whole Bible. And he realized what they wanted him to say and what he saw within the pages of the Bible weren't aligning. And so he quickly began to change his message. It changed from servants obey your masters to vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And so the message started to change, and they were like, hold on now. Wait, no, that's not what we brought you here to do now. You're supposed to say, servants obey your master. And he said, listen, I've read the whole Bible, okay? And what you want me to say and what this says are 2 different things. And so Nat went to sleep one night and he felt like he had a vision from God that on the next blood moon, which in 1832 was a year for the solar eclipse. That's what the blood moon was to them. And so he said, when you see the next blood moon, that is your cue. You get your people together and you kill every single white person that you see. And you go from plantation to plantation and you set your brothers and sisters free. And he said, yes, Lord. And so that is exactly what he did. He got together about 15 or so of his boys and he started at the Turner plantation, killed everybody. And I mean, everybody, even the kids, because then he was like, listen, y'all are going to grow up and become masters. So, sorry, gotta go. They went from plantation to plantation for almost like a week. They killed about 60 white people in total. And the thing, like Killmonger, he kept saying, he tried to tell y'all, we've never had the tools enough to be able to fight our oppressors, and he was right. They were not necessarily outnumbered, but they were outgunned. And so, as the rebellion went and traveled, they gained numbers, but eventually the militia was able to stop them as well. However, the Nat Turner Rebellion is one of the most successful rebellions in American history because of the number of people that were killed, the number of white people that were killed. Although most of these slaves were captured when the militia first met up with them, Nat Turner was able to evade capture for about 6 weeks, and then he was finally found. And like I said, for every single rebellion, things got harsher and harsher. That is why by the time we get to 1865, we are living under such an oppressive form of slavery because of things like that. And so they not only killed, they hung Nat Turner, but they dismembered his body and skinned him and sold his parts as like souvenirs and stuff. Just really disgusting things. And then they put the rest of the slaves who participated in the rebellion, they lined them up on the road basically as a warning. If you try this, this is what's going to happen to you. And then very shortly after that, we see the Fugitive Slave Act and things of those natures. So what I'm trying to tell you is there's a reason why things got so bad. It's because people were fighting back. It wasn't that just everybody was swing low, sweet chariot, yes, and massa. No, they were fighting back. Multiple rebellions, not just in America either. There were revolts in Jamaica, and of course we know that the most successful one was the one in Haiti, because those slaves revolted and took over the country. They won. That is why Haiti is a nation today, because the slaves won. Okay? Okay. So that's why I'm saying we have to abolish the way we think about slavery. Everyone was not docile and fiddler and these good white folk kind of thing. It was not like that for everyone. There were slaves who fought back. Here's an interesting point for you. Slavery was so horrendous that it changed weather. Prior to the transatlantic slave trade in the Middle Passage, there were no tornadoes, there were no tropical storms, there were no hurricanes in North America. That only happened after the Middle Passage. And if you look at the pattern of how tornadoes and hurricanes travel, they always start in Africa, in that area, and they travel the same route that slave ships travel. So, slavery was so bad it pissed off the weather. That's what I'm saying. Almost done. Almost done. When we are discussing history, it is not just important for us to pinpoint certain people and that's one of my things why I had this event in the first place, because I got sick of hearing only about Martin Luther King, Frederick Douglass, and that Garrett A. Morgan. Yeah, Rosa Parks sat on the bus and Garrett A. Morgan made the stoplight and the gas mask, and that George Washington Carver did a whole bunch of stuff with a peanut. I was sick of just hearing those same people over and over and over and over again. And I saw a video recently that made me want to highlight this next section, which is entitled The Importance of Allies. There were many white people who helped and aided in our cause for freedom. That is one of the main fundamental reasons that Dr. King and Malcolm X disagreed on. One of my favorite lines, I'm sorry, I apologize in advance, but one of my favorite lines from Malcolm X, and this is something that he actually said. He was approached in the movie. he was approached by a white girl when he was in Harvard, and she was like, I'm just so burdened. I really feel bad about everything that's going along. What can I do as a white person to help you in your cause for freedom? And he looks her dead in her eye and says nothing, and then keeps walking. I don't agree with that. There were a lot of allies that we had who joined our cause for freedom. We don't just see that within the civil rights movement, but we see that even before all of that began. So let's go to the first slide. This is the story of Mom Bet, right? That's a good old country slave name. I'm sorry. She is important for a lot of different reasons. One of the main reasons is that she was one of the few people who was able to sue for her freedom and win. She sued the state of Massachusetts for her freedom and she won. Mumbet was a slave in Massachusetts during the time of the Revolutionary War. And the thing that I loved about it is the power of underestimation, right? So these white people were basically acting like she was not in the room. She was a slave in the house of a lawyer who was very prominent within the American Revolution. And so oftentimes he would have his friends over. They gathered together and they were talking about freedom and how they were going to win for the cause of freedom, and all men were created equal, and we had these rights, and we were going to fight for our freedom against the tyranny of the British Empire. So she's hearing all of these things while serving these people as they're eating lunch and dinner, and she's just listening. She's listening to all these people talking about how they're going to free, they won this battle and they won this battle, and we're very close to our freedom. She kept hearing this talk about freedom, so she said, oh, okay, gotcha. She was listening. Then one of the things, this is why I love black women, she was making dinner. She had a younger slave with her, and they were, making the different things that they were making. And the younger slave happened to dip her finger in the sugar and take a sugar cube. And it just so happened that the mistress of the house saw her. And she took the, like the fire poker when you do fireplace, and it breaks up the wood. She took that out of the fire, okay? And was getting ready to strike the young slave, but Mumbet stepped in between the mistress and the young girl. So she took the lash. And she had this gaping wound on her hand, or on her arm rather, and it never really healed correctly. So here's how bad Mumbet is. She begins to wear her sleeve rolled up so that every time she's serving, you could see the scar on her arm. And so naturally, even though they were talking and they would look down and see her hand. Oh my goodness, what happened? She was, let me tell you what happened. See, we was just fixing dinner one day, and then she kept telling the story, and that story pricked the heart of this gentleman right here. His name is Timothy Sedgwick. Timothy Sedgwick happened to be a lawyer. And Mumbet went to him and they began talking about the fact that slavery was being abolished within Massachusetts. They were stepping away from the institution as a whole. That's one of the reasons why we had the American Revolution in the beginning, because Britain was ending the slave trade. That wasn't all about taxation and representation. But she went to this lawyer and they began to talk. And he said, you know what? You're right. You have a case. Not only were you unjustly beaten, not only do you bear the scar, but we actually have a case. You can sue for your freedom. And so that is exactly what they do. She, along with Timothy Sedgwick, he represents her. They sue for her freedom, and she wins. And she is one of the only women, especially within Massachusetts, to be able to win freedom through the legal process. All because of her ally, Timothy Sedgwick. He was able to make a very, very, very good case for her. And she changed her name to Elizabeth Friedman. And so that is what she carries to her death. And the Sedgwick family, can you go to the next slide, please? The Sedgwick family honors her when she dies, and they put this on her tombstone. It says, Elizabeth Friedman, also known by the name of Mumbet, died December 28th, 1829. Her supposed age was 85 years. She was born a slave and remained a slave for nearly 30 years. She could neither read nor write, yet in her own sphere, she had no superior or equal. She neither wasted time nor property. She never violated a trust nor failed to perform a duty. In every situation of domestic trial, she was the most efficient helper and the tenderest friend. Good mother, farewell. She sued for her freedom, and she won. And she was forever known as Elizabeth Friedman, right? The importance of an ally. Without Timothy Sedgwick taking on that case, standing by her side, she probably wouldn't have gotten free at all. She probably would have died a slave. But because of Timothy Sedgwick, she was able to sue for her freedom, and she died a free woman. Next case, my homeboy, my friend, John Brown, friend in my head. He's a friend in my head. He really is. John Brown is my type of guy, okay? John Brown, alive during the Civil War era, a little bit before the Civil War era. He was a staunch abolitionist. Defended the rights of black people. Friend of Frederick Douglass, friend of William Lloyd Garrison, all abolitionists. But the thing that separated John Brown from a William Lloyd Garrison, it was the fact that John Brown got to the point where he was like, okay, come on, let's be serious. Listen, I love Jesus as much as the next person, but these slaveholders are not going to give up their slaves if we just go to them and telling them that, it's morally wrong. They are turning a deaf ear to this morally wrong thing. They think they're right. We can't win. We can't get these people freedom by just saying it's wrong. They know slavery is wrong. They're still doing it. So John Brown got fed up. He got, in the words of Fannie Lou Hamer, sick and tired of being sick and tired. He went to Frederick Douglass. He was like, listen, this Kansas-Nebraska Act, which was the act that was basically a part of the Compromise of 1850, which allowed Kansas to enter as basically a choice state, right? So slavery really was a choice in that state, that specific state. The president and the Congress decided that whoever got there first, if the abolitionists got there first, then Kansas would be free. If the slave holders got there first, then Kansas would be a slave state. So basically, they committed, they made this a perfect climate for a fight. Kansas-Nebraska Act, Fugitive Slave Act passes. John Brown is like, I can't do this anymore with y'all. They are not going to listen to reason. So we got to kill them. Point blank, period. Okay? This is what we're going to do. We're going to go to the slave states. We're going to take over the big house. We're going to kill the master, arm the slaves. Right? He didn't want to be in control. He just wanted to arm the slaves. He wanted to fight along with the slaves to make them fight for their freedom. We can't win quoting scriptures. I love the scriptures, but they're not listening to the scriptures. We have to do something. If we want to set these people free, we got to put action. Can't be just all talk and no action. We got to have action. And Frederick Douglass was like, listen, I can't do that, all right? I'm a pacifist. I'm gonna stick to my little session over here, my talking points. I'm gonna stick to that. But God be with you. John Brown packs up his wagon, takes his sons down to Kansas, and that is exactly what he does. He takes over Harper's Ferry. He tried to. It was like almost like a Union port kind of thing, where they had guns stored and ammunition. And so John Brown wanted to get all of that ammunition, get the guns, and then start going to the southern states and arming the slaves. But unfortunately, he wasn't able to do so. The slavery side of the war, well, this is before the Civil War. So the slavery side was able to quash John Brown's attempt to arm the slaves. But here's why I love John Brown. It's because he was bad enough to put his mouth and his money where his mouth was. He took his own sons down to Kansas and literally fought the slaveholders and the people who were on the side of slavery. Why? Because he believed in freedom that much. And he didn't want the credit. That's another reason why I love him. It wasn't about him. It wasn't about his sons. It wasn't about his idea. It was really about empowering the black people to be able to defend themselves. That is what a true ally is. It's not all about you. It's not all about your ideas and what you want. It's coming up alongside a person, empowering them so that they can take it and then go further. And that was John Brown's whole point. If we can aid them and get them started, then they can continue it. It has nothing to do with me and my sons and what I want. No, I just want to help get them started. They deserve to be free. They're people too. This institution is morally wrong. So this is what I want to do. Now, do I agree with the whole killing thing? Of course not. But he was able to come to the conclusion that desperate times call for desperate measures. And he, like I said, he put his money where his mouth was. He put his own sons on the line. He put his life on the line. He and I think 5 of his sons were all killed in that attempt to help arm the slaves so that they could go on to freedom. But Frederick Douglass later goes on, as he remembers his life, and when the Emancipation Proclamation Act is signed, he said there wouldn't be a civil war, there wouldn't be an Emancipation Proclamation if John Brown had not did what he did. He said his was the starting point of the Civil War, which turned the tide, which eventually freed the slaves. So that is one of the reasons why I love John Brown, because he was able to be man enough to lower himself so that somebody else can be put forward. Y'all still awake? We're closing. We are closing. When we're talking about allies, it's not just people. Yes, people are great allies, but sometimes inanimate objects can be allies. And one of the beautiful things that I love about Black history is how we were able to take systems and documents and even institutions that were never meant for us, but use them to our advantage. Things like the Constitution was not written for us. Declaration of Independence was not written for us. Shoot, America, they never wanted us to really be here, even though they invited us to the party. But we were able to take those systems, those institutions, and use them to our advantage. We were able to take the Constitution and the amendments in the different cases, right? We were able to take the law. That's another line that I love from the movie Marshall, where he said, we have tools now. We have things that are on our side that can help us gain even more freedom. We were able to take cases and things that were written in the Constitution, like Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal. It was Charles Hamilton Houston and Thurgood Marshall and really the Howard machine, those lawyers who came out of Howard University, school, interestingly enough, that we wouldn't have if not for Andrew Johnson, the racist president, who was later impeached. He did one good thing with his life, and that was give us the charter land for Howard University. So, just fun fact there. But we were able to take the Constitution and landmark cases like that and use it to our advantage. Charles Hamilton Houston had a brilliant idea. We dare not question the law. We know that the law is separate but equal. We just want to uphold the law. So we want to make sure that, we're fine with the separate, but let's talk about this but equal part. And so they went down to the southern schools and they would ask them, do you have, separate classroom for each age? No, sir. Do you have running water? No, sir. Do you have bathrooms? No, sir. Do you have fans for the summer? No, sir. Do you have books? No, sir. Do you have utensils? No, sir. Everything that was in white schools were not in the black schools, and that is the genius of what they did. They used the law, turned it on its head, and were able to win the Brown versus Board of Education case, which desegregated schools. That's what I'm talking about. Things that are not really meant for us that we still use to our advantage. Things like the Declaration of Independence. It was not written for us. Thomas Jefferson was not sitting there thinking about us when he wrote that all men are created equal. He was talking about him and his friends. But we were able to take that and use it to our advantage. Question? You want to know about the national anthem? Okay. Well, national anthem was written by this guy named Francis Scott Key. Francis Scott Key was in the War of 1812, I believe, when he put pen to paper to write this poem. It was originally a poem. It became a song later on. The problem is not with the first verse, nor the second. Even though we know the only verse we know was the first verse. That's where a lot of the confusion arises, because we only know the first verse. We think that the whole song is just that first verse, but it is not. The problem is with Francis Scott Key, the person who was a slaveholder and a racist. It is not just with him as a person, but what he wrote in that third verse. No hireling nor slave, right? Basically, we don't want the slaves to have freedom. It's what he wrote in that third verse. So, in this whole theme of what I'm exactly saying, things that were not written for us, but we use to our advantage, right? Can't nobody sing the national anthem like black people. Tell me that you don't like Whitney Houston's version of the national anthem. Tell me you don't like Marvin Gaye's version of the national anthem, right? It wasn't written for us. Francis Scott Key was not thinking about black people when he wrote that poem, but we use it to our advantage. Now, the problem comes in with Colin Kaepernick and this whole, kneeling and standing for the anthem thing. It's hypocritical on many levels. Number one, there is no law, there is no rule, not even within the NFL, that says you have to be standing when the national anthem plays. It is just something that we do as Americans. It's like putting our hand over our heart when we say the Pledge of Allegiance. That's not a law. You can't bring me to court if I don't put my hand over my heart when I say the Pledge of Allegiance, right? Jehovah's Witnesses don't do it. There's certain people who don't do it, right? So the issue is not with the national anthem. The issue isn't even with Colin Kaepernick. The issue is with the reason that he was doing it. And here's why I know this for a fact. Because there were 2 games in which Colin Kaepernick was sitting during the national anthem. And nobody said anything. He went unnoticed. He was photographed. People saw him sitting. Nobody said anything when he was sitting. Finally, on the third time he did it, a reporter asked why he was sitting. That's when the problem ensued. Because he then said, I don't feel comfortable standing for the national anthem when my people are being over policed and shot for no reason. This is around the time with Eric Garner and Philando Castile and the one in Louisiana. I can't think of his name because there's been so many of them. But back to back to back, there have been unarmed shooting of black men. And when he said that, when he said, I am sitting because I do not like the fact that my people are being killed for no reason, that we are being over policed, that we are, there's still, and then he said, get this, veterans are coming home to poverty. They can't live. They end up either turned out on drugs or become homeless. Our veterans aren't treated correctly. This is all in the first interview that he said. Then there was a problem. After he said all of that, even though he very clearly did mention the part about veterans as well, it wasn't just about police brutality, it was also about the treatment of veterans because the U.S. has terrible treatment of veterans. Just ride past the VA and you'll see what I mean. That is when the problem became a big issue. Then it was, he's dishonoring the flag, even though it has nothing to do with the flag. Because the only reason why the flag is there is because after 9/11, the NFL signed a contract with the government to have that whole hoopla start before the games. Because prior to 9/11, that did not happen. Then the Army, the government, and the NFL all came together, paid each other, and now we have that whole scene before NFL games. They're being paid to do that. That's unpatriotic. But nobody talks about that, right? They're talking about Colin Kaepernick. Why? Because he's a black man who decided he wasn't going to play by their rules. Then, to make matters worse, remember, he was sitting at this point. Nate Boyer, who is a veteran, Caucasian veteran at that, he writes to Colin Kaepernick and says, I understand what you're saying. I agree with what you're saying. But as a veteran, it is disrespectful when you sit for the national anthem. Get this. It is more respectful for you to kneel during the national anthem because that is what we do when we lose a fellow soldier. I won't kneel with you, but I will stand beside you, put my hand on your shoulder to show solidarity that I agree with what you're doing. That is why he started to kneel, because before he was sitting. Then he kneeled. Then Eric Reed started to kneel with him. Then other people started to kneel. And then it was cold black, these dudes is out of control. That's when we had the problem. That's when your president decided to call the man an SOB. That's when everything spiraled out of control. But the beginning of the issue was Colin Kaepernick saying the fact that there was 2 shootings of unarmed black men back to back is unacceptable with me because they are adding to a list that is long of people who have been doing the same thing. So this whole thing about it being unpatriotic, about him not respecting veterans is a whole bunch of hogwash, has nothing to do with that. Yes. The liar in chief made it worse. He put gasoline on the fire and just made it worse. But the national anthem is absolutely racist. But, as I was saying, it is one of those things that black people do. We take it and we blackify it and we make it better. Because can't nobody sing the national anthem like Whitney Houston and Marvin Gaye. Right? Things that weren't meant for us, but we take it and we make it. Yes. So the third verse, The part that we take issue with is no refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave. Basically, you can try to escape, but we'll still kill you. Right? But, home of the free. Land of the free, home of the brave, Gotta love it. But that's exactly what I'm talking about. Things that were not meant for us, but that we take and we just embrace and make it better. These people knew that they were wrong. Thomas Jefferson had 6 whole mulatto kids. Did he try to free any one of them? Uh-uh. That is why, towards the end of his life, he writes this: I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever, that considering numbers, nature, and natural means only a revolution of the wheel of fortune, in exchange, fortune is among possible events that it may become probably by supernatural interference. The Almighty has no attribute that can take side with us in such a contest. Basically, I know it was wrong to own people, and I'm kind of worried about that now that I'm getting older and I'm about to die. But just a man of my time, right? Because that's the excuse that we use. Oh, they were just men of their time. Everybody owned slaves. No, not everybody, right? These people knew what they were doing. I tremble when I reflect that God is just. Basically, I know I'm about to pay for this. I know I'm about to pay for this, but right? All of them, they all wavered. They said one thing in public and did another thing in private. Washington, I read his biography by Ron Chernow, and they were like really, really confused. Him and his wife were confused when 2 of his slaves escaped. They were like, we just don't understand. Why? I mean, we feed them, we give them shelter, like they're always singing. What's the problem? Right? These people knew what they were doing. This Thomas Jefferson, he is a whole portrait of an anti-ally. That is what an ally does not look like. Because he, Washington, Madison, all of them had the resources and the power to be able to do something about slavery, but instead they decide to put into the Constitution that nothing can be said on the matter for another 8 years. Awesome. Right? Anti-allies. But we were able to use even the document written by that racist, the Declaration of Independence. We used that and said, listen, if all men are created equal, what's up? We were able to use documents, to use institutions that were not for us, but still were able to make it work for our good. The untold story of the civil rights movement is how we should organize. What we do not highlight about the civil rights movement is how organized it really was. There was a system in place. They stuck to that system, and that is why they were able to change laws. Okay? We didn't just start a conversation. They didn't just drive a movement. They changed laws. Right? There were questions that you had to answer. There were interviews that you had to go through. There were letters that you had to write. SNCC asked you, are you comfortable, white people, with being under the leadership of black people? CORE asked you, listen, we want to know your intent, why you're here. What is your purpose? Are you here just to have a photo op with black people so it can seem that you're cool? Or are you really here to get down to business and work? That is one of the reasons why the civil rights movement was so successful, because they were so organized, because of how they utilized the media, because how they fought stereotypes. Can you pull up that picture? The toward the end. It's a collage. Last pic. Yes, this one. There's something that is prevalent in every single picture and in every single video clip that you will see of the civil rights movement. And that thing is very, very rarely where you see any of them dressed down. Very rarely will you see a picture of Dr. King dressed casually. Very rarely will you see a group of protesters dressed casually. They are always dressed up. They were always dressed up. Absolutely. They were always dressed up. There was a reason for that. That was not by accident. This is John Lewis's book. In it, he writes about the organization that they had to go through in order to join the protests. He created a list of do's and don'ts when in a protest. This was specifically for a sit-in. Do not, number one, strike back nor cuss if abused. Do not laugh out. Do not hold conversations with the floor walker. Who was the floor walker? There was always one person who did not sit in and who watched what went on. So when the sit-in turned violent, they were able to run to the payphone, call the lawyer, and call the ambulance. Even though most time the ambulance would get there and they would sit there and look at them. But there was a floor walker who was always able to leave out and notify when something was getting ready to go down. Do not leave your seat until your leader has given you permission to do so. There was always one person who spoke. They did not all speak. There was one person who was designated the leader who spoke for the entire group. And when he or she said something, the rest of them followed. Do not block entrances to stores outside nor the aisles inside. Do show yourself friendly and courteous at all times. See, now we got a problem. These people spitting at me, pouring ketchup over my head, hot coffee on me. You talking about smile and be courteous. I'm sorry, what? Do sit straight. Always face the counter. Report all serious incidents to your leader. Refer information seekers to your leader in a polite manner. And the last one, remember the teachings of Jesus Christ, Mahatma Gandhi, and Martin Luther King. Love and nonviolence is the way. Who wants to participate in a sit-in? Okay? They were serious about this thing. These were the rules. They had workshops in which they role played. Some people would be the agitators, other people would be the protesters. They would call each other nigger. They would get in their face. They would say all kinds of things, put cigarettes out on each other. Why? They were preparing themselves for what they were getting ready to encounter. So by the time that it actually happened, they wouldn't strike back because they already knew what was going to happen. They were very, very, very organized. It was a rule that you had to dress up. Men were in suits. Women were in your best skirt, shoes, stockings, and your shoes had to be heels, ladies. These were the rules. You had to dress up to get beat and go to jail. Why? Because they knew that they had to fight stereotypes. They had to fight the stereotype of the lazy black person, the uncouth, unkept black person. They had to fight every single stereotype, not with just what they said, but what they did, what they wore, how they carried themselves. That is why in every single, even with the Nation of Islam, say what you want about them, but even with the Nation of Islam, they were all in suits. All the women were in those white dresses, right? All praise is due to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Like, there was a reason that they did this. Very, very, very rarely will you see those protesters of the civil rights movement dressed down. Until the Black Panthers, which I'm giving homage to today with my all black and my beret because black power. But if you are a reader like me, please do pick this book up, Walking with the Wind. You can tell how much of a nerd I am by how this thing is all annotated and bookmarked and all that good stuff. I have embraced my nerdiness. Okay, it is a part of who I am. If you like it, great. If you don't, so what? It is who I am, okay? My mother used to make me read out loud to her in the car. She would ask me every single time I brought a book, she would say, read it out loud. And I'm like, what? Are you that interested in the Princess Diaries? Like, I don't, but I understand why she was doing it now. But back then, I was just like, maybe she really wants to hear about me at Thermopolis. I guess, I don't know. But there was a reason why they did every single thing they did. Very organized. And that is one of the things why we're losing today. In the words of Malcolm X, we are not outnumbered, we are out-organized. We need to organize. We have to learn from what our ancestors did, from what they did. Like I said, they changed laws. Now, I love Malcolm to death. I do. But brother, you ain't changed no laws. Okay? So for all of your yakking, I appreciate it. I mean, I've been had, hoodwinked, run amok. I get it. All right? I was with you. We ain't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us. I was with you. But you ain't changed no laws, bruh. Dr. King did. So we have to learn from what they did to make sure that we are propelling ourselves to the future. Black people have continually pushed the movement towards freedom and equality forward by utilizing the rights and privileges that they had and have tried to bar us from the start. We use the Declaration of Independence to leverage the leaders of this nation and remind them of the words, all men are created equal. We use the First Amendment to speak against the inhumanities of slavery and the injustice of Jim Crow. We use the right to protest to band together an undeterred, relentless group of courageous people to stand firm against the indignities of segregation. We use the Second Amendment to arm ourselves against the terrorists that tried to run us out of the country that we built. We use the 15th Amendment and the Voting Rights Act to boot out lawmakers and politicians who didn't have our best interest in mind and sent in people who would work on our behalf, regardless of party affiliation. We use the very Constitution that deemed us 60% of a human to kick down the doors of stubborn-willed governors and integrated schools that we belonged and thrived in. We use racist presidents to create Howard and Fisk, historically black colleges and universities. We use segregation to focus on the building up of our own communities because nobody takes care of us like us. We used our knowledge of the earth and the land to aid plantation owners. We used the gospel that was taught to us in error and were able to pull out remnants of hope that sustained us through 400 years of oppression and discrimination. We used the story of Moses freeing the children of Israel and found our own Moses who led us through the new Red Sea, the Underground Railroad. We used the rhythms of Africa to create songs of sorrow and signal to not only lift up our spirits, but to hide the message beyond the song. We used the strength of our ancestors to survive Jim Crow, to survive segregation, to survive the war on drugs, to survive Katrina, to survive the housing crisis, and we're still using it today to endure police brutality, to to endure mass incarceration, to endure the over-policing of our neighborhoods, and to endure the disproportionate killings of unarmed Black people, to endure the pay gaps and the health disparities, and we're definitely using it to endure 45. We are a people that are strong and mighty. We are resilient and tenacious. We are unbothered and unmovable. We have to make sure that we continue what our ancestors started and keep going and build upon the legacy that they left for us. And by all means, we have to make sure that, in the words of Queen Auntie Maxine, that we reclaim our time. Thank you all so much for coming. That's it.